Hey everyone, I'm Maureen, and today I'm going to be sharing with you how to make my winter Nomi pattern. This is Nomi pattern 2146, and this is a blazer dress with exaggerated shoulders and an exaggerated hip. It also comes with Welt pockets, and then a two-piece sleeve, and then a button front with a really beautiful jewel collar. And I love this pattern. I know I say it all the time, but this might be like my favorite one. Go ahead and cut out your pattern pieces and grab your fabric, grab your sewing machine, and let's get started. Once all of your pattern pieces are cut out, go ahead and interface pattern pieces 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and then transfer your dart markings to the wrong side of pattern piece number 1. Gently pull those two sides together and begin connecting your dart legs using pins. You always want to make sure that your dart legs are matching up on either side of the pins before you take it to your machine. Backstitch at the beginning and then run your stitch all the way through and let a little tail form. The tail will essentially knot your dart stitched together, therefore reducing the chances of having a bubble at the point of your dart. Do this to both sides and then give this a good press. I even snipped open the dart legs on the wrong side so that it would lay a little bit flatter. Now we are going to attach pattern piece number 2 to the side, and matching up those notches and those edges, go ahead and pin that together. With that opening there, you may have to put extra pins to secure it in place. Take this to your sewing machine and stitch it down, and you'll do this on both sides of your dress front. Be sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end, and going carefully and also removing those pins as you go, and then press those seams open at your iron. Now we're going to get into our welt pocket. There are many different ways to make a welt pocket, and I'm going to divert just a tad from the actual instructions in the pattern, but I promise you we will get the same end result. Transfer all of your markings onto the front of the jacket, and then taking your welt piece, we are going to pin this wrong sides together. We are going to have two welt pieces, one for the top and one for the bottom. So we're going to do this a few times, and using the dots on the welt pieces, use that as your guide to stitch this down. And while we're at the cutting table, I'm also going to prepare the flap piece. So using right sides together with your lining piece, and then of course your interfaced outer piece, place these right sides together and pin them in place. We are going to stitch this down at 5/8 all around those edges. Once you are done stitching this down, we will clip in those curves as well. Okay, so back at our cutting table, we are clipping in those curves like we said we would, and then we are going to take those welt pieces and we are going to trim those down to a very scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and this is going to be super helpful, so don't be scared to do this step. Once you turn your flap right side out, go ahead and poke out those corners and make sure they're nice and rounded, and then give this a really good press at your iron. Now moving on to attaching the welt pieces, we are going to pin those welts to the front, placing them along the seam lines and the stitch lines. So that seam line that you did on the welt has to connect directly to that stitch line, or I'm sorry, that marking that you did on the front of your jacket. It is very, very important that you are very intentional about this because it can throw off your entire welt pocket if it's not placed properly. And definitely take your time. This is time lapsed, but this took a few minutes for me to do. So at your machine, go ahead and stitch this down. I did widen my stitch length just because I'm sewing through all thicknesses. And be sure to take your time here as well. And if you mess up, don't be afraid to unpick it and start over, or even start a practice one before you get into your fashion fabric. All right, so this is what it should look like. And then we're going to do the same exact thing on the top welt as well. So pinning it in place, matching up the stitch line to the markings on the front of the jacket. Once again, be sure to take your time and do this carefully and intentionally. Back at your machine, stitch between the dots on the welt, removing the pins as you go. And once again, I did widen my stitch length here because I am sewing through all thicknesses. So this is just a tip that I learned along the way with doing welt pockets. I am going to snip in the middle. That slash that was on the front of the jacket is super helpful for that. The only thing I'm not going to do is create that little triangle piece yet because I don't want it to weaken over time. I just want my slit. That way it's easier to place my flap in place. So with the flap, I'm going to place it between the dots on the top welt, and then I'm going to stitch this in place at my machine. On pattern piece number 5, I transferred that top line with the dots onto the pattern piece because I'm going to use the line and the dots as a guide to stitch this along the lower welt pocket, just like we did the flap, but this is going to be the pocket part. And again, take your time with this because we are going to be pinning and stitching through all thicknesses, but make sure that that line matches up with the stitch on the bottom welt. At our sewing machine, we are going to slowly stitch across this line that we transferred over. Be sure to take your time, remove the pins as you go, and then backstitch at the beginning and the end. Now that all of my pieces are in place, I am going to make those little triangles at the corners. And I like to make my triangles a little bit bigger. I find that it helps to stabilize the fabric. Now I'm going to take my pattern piece number 5, which is my pocket, and slide it through that slash there and tuck the welt seam allowances through the slash as well. And you'll start to see the welt pocket form, but you will need to take this to the iron and press this out immensely because it is thicker fabric. I definitely recommend using a pressing ham and possibly a tailor's clapper of some sort. But you want to make sure that your welt pieces are tucked neatly and gently behind your jacket front. Once you've given this a good press, go ahead and whip stitch your welt edges together, and then you're also going to want to turn this onto the back side and pin your pocket piece upwards with raw edges together, and we are going to sew down the sides. So this includes the triangular ends on the inside and the welt seam allowances as well. And because we are sewing through all thicknesses, once we get to the welt pieces, be sure to take your time, and if you need to, widen that stitch length and go over it, back stitching forwards and backwards to secure that in place. Now we're going to stitch across the top. Be sure not to go over that stitch line that you made earlier, or else you're going to pinch the front of your jacket. So make sure that you're stitching within that seam allowance there, and then you'll notice that your pocket will be closed up. So congratulations, you have just finished the hardest part of this dress. Go ahead and set these pieces to the side, and we are going to work on our back pattern pieces. All right, so be sure to stay stitch the outer edges of pattern piece number 7, and then transfer your dart legs to the wrong side of the fabric. Again, I did this with tailor's chalk, and I am going to bring the dart legs together with the lines and the dots. And what I'm going to do is, once I'm at my machine, I am going to stitch the dart from the middle to one point, and then gently overlapping just a couple of stitches, I'm going to work from the middle to the other point. And so you'll see me do that here, and go ahead and repeat these steps for both sides of pattern piece number 7. Back at our cutting table, we are going to stitch both pattern pieces number 7 together at the center back seam. At your sewing machine, stitch this forwards and backwards at the beginning, at the end, and then press those seams open at your iron. All right, so at the side that we stay stitched on, we are going to attach pattern piece number 8. And this is very similar to pattern piece number 2 on the front. So again, we want to make sure we're matching up the notches and the curves and all that. And we're going to take this to our machine, stitch it down at 5/8, back stitching at the front and at the end, and then press those seams open at your machine or at your iron as well. All right, so we are cooking with grease, y'all. So go ahead and stitch down your shoulders and your side seams of the front and back of your dress. We are starting to take shape at this point. Back stitching at the front and at the end, of course, and then take this to your iron, press the seams open, and let's start working on the sleeves. All right, so we've got pattern piece number 11 and we've got pattern piece number 12. You may ease stitch on pattern piece number 11 between the notches. You might find that you may not need to, honestly, and then go ahead and pin these together, matching up those notches. I like to pin both sides at the same time and then sew them at the same time. It really saves me a lot of time and a lot of steps between my cutting table and my machine. So once you are done stitching both pieces together, of course, press these seams open and then do a basting stitch or 2 rows of basting stitches around the sleeve cap. Okay, so gently pull those basting stitches around the sleeve cap, and you want to create not necessarily a gather, but just enough of a curve to make your sleeve cap just curve inward just a little bit. And I'm doing this on the wrong side, which I find to be a little bit easier, and then turn it right side out, and then you'll see that the curve is still there. Right sides together, go ahead and attach your sleeve to your armhole and take this to your machine and sew it down at 5/8. All right, so both sleeves should be done. Now we are going to insert our shoulder pads. So mine is a makeshift shoulder pad. You can use foam. I've seen people use bra cups, or you can use traditional shoulder pads. It's completely up to you. You can actually double this up. I actually doubled mine up on my pattern cover photo. And so you're going to take this and pin it in place, making sure that it's anchored between both dots on your sleeve cap, and then stitch within that seam allowance. So I'm going to do mine at 3/8 of an inch within that seam allowance on my machine. I would like to add here, if you're not sure about where you want to place your shoulder pads, you can try on your jacket and kind of manipulate and maneuver. Yes, mine is between the dots, but yours may be more forward and maybe more backwards. Once you're done with that, tack the ends to the armhole seam. You're going to want to use the same thread color as your jacket. That way it kind of hides in between the seams. All right, now we're going to work on our lining. So stay stitched the edge of pattern piece number 9, then add in your dart on pattern piece 13, and then we are going to pin these together at the curve, and we are going to stitch this in place. Now notice that pattern piece number 9 is going to be gently longer than pattern piece 13, and that's totally okay. We want this to happen. With right sides together, we are going to pin the side front lining to pattern piece 13. So that would be pattern piece number 2 to pattern piece 13. Take this to our machine, and just like how we did on the front of our outer pieces, we are going to sew this in place and then press these seams open. All right, so now we're going to work on our back lining pieces. This is going to be stitched together the same way we did pattern pieces 7 and 8 on our outer lining pieces. However, we are also going to stay stitch the sides and then the neck piece right there. And then we are also going to make a pleat. So you should have marked your pleat markings. It's just a couple of inches down on the center front. And then you're going to pin this in place, and then we're going to stitch it down at our machine. It might feel awkward. It might feel like, why is this here? But it's going to make absolute total sense. Now that that's done, we are going to work on attaching our back facing, which is pattern piece number 10. I love pattern piece number 10 because this could be a really great opportunity to add a personal tag if you like, once it's done being stitched down. But for now, we are going to stitch this down, matching up the notches and the curves, and then we are going to take this to our machine and stitch it down at 5/8, and be sure to press this seam. Now that this is complete, we are going to work on sewing our front and back pieces at the shoulders and at the side seams, just like how we did on the outer pieces. Once this is complete, you are going to want to press these seams open again. Once you complete this step, go ahead and work on your sleeve lining pieces. So that will be pattern pieces 11 and 12, and you are going to make sleeve caps and ease them in and stitch them down just like how we did with our outer pieces. And then you are also going to take a seam ripper of some sort and just make a probably like a 6-inch opening on one of the side lining pieces. This is going to help make sure that you can actually get through your lining piece once everything is sewn together. Grab your outer piece of your dress and lay it out, and then we are going to put right sides together, connecting the lining to the outer piece. I like to start around the neck edge, matching edges, matching seams, and matching notches. And then I like to work my way down to the sides of the jacket. At our machine, we are going to stitch this down at 5/8. If you know me, then you know that I like to start at the center back of the neck edge and work my way down one side of the dress and then flip the dress around and begin again at the center back and work my way down the other side. This helps make sure that the fabric does not shift while I'm working on it and that I just don't get any wonky stretch lines or anything like that. Be sure to pivot at the corners of your neckline and then stitch all the way down to the edge of the dress. Back at the cutting table, I am clipping in corners and then I'm also making a few notches around the neck edge. You can also understitch this even though it doesn't explicitly say it in the instructions. I definitely recommend it. Okay, on the lower edge of your dress, this is where it gets important that that facing piece was a little bit longer than the lining pieces. At 1.5 inches, we are going to draw a line, and that's going to be our stitch line, and that's going to enclose the jacket pieces. Now, on the instructions, it says to just enclose that itty bitty part of the facing, but I like to go a little bit further into my lining. That way I'm not slip stitching the entire bottom. So feel free to go further into the lining stitch, and hopefully this will leave a smaller opening to slip stitch later down the line. All right, now that that's done, I am going to clip this corner. That way it's a sharper, more pointed edge once I turn this right side out, and you see that there. Also notice that my slip stitch space is just a little bit less than the entire jacket. So there's that. And now we are going to work on doing our sleeves. So I've already done one sleeve because I wanted y'all to see that it is possible, this trick I'm about to show you. Okay, so using one of the openings of your dress, go through the sleeve and find the edge of the lining and the actual sleeve. And you want to make sure that the pieces are not twisted up or anything like that. So what you're going to do is you're going to kind of do like a lobster pinch and pinch the seam there on the jacket piece and then the lining piece. And you're going to hold them in place as you pull it through the sleeve tunnel. It's very important that you hold it in place because you don't want to twist your sleeve up. Once you pull it out, you'll notice that the seam lines match up, and you are going to pin this all the way around. And this is one of my favorite tricks to enclose a lined sleeve. At your machine, you will stitch this at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then back at the table, I'm going to show you exactly what we're going to do. All right, so at your table, pull your sleeve from the right side out, and you'll see that it's still a tunnel and it's still connected, and you're going to pull it out, and then you're going to notice that your sleeve now has a lining, it now has a beautiful hem, and everything is nicely tucked in. And all you have to do is press this, and you're all set. All right, so go ahead and add your buttons to the front, and you can also add buttons to the sleeves as well. This is optional. And give this a good press or a good steam. I know I had to take mine to the cleaners so that it can get steamed nicely and everything like that, but you're all done. All right, y'all, I can't wait to see what you make. Don't forget to tag me and Simplicity Creative Group, and I'll see y'all next time. Thanks for watching.